Hello and welcome to the Film Angle. I'm Alex.
And I'm Kris.
And today we are going to be mainly talking about the latest Netflix release from Andrew Dominik,
Mm-hmm.
a Marilyn Monroe kind of biopic, kind of not, some fiction. It plays around with it a lot. We'll get into it. It's Blonde. We're going to be talking about Blonde. And before we start talking about Blonde, it's worth saying there's a lot of horrible stuff happens in Blonde, and that might come up in the discussions.
Mm-hmm.
So here's your warning now, guys. Blonde contains rape, suicide, abortion, child abuse, all the nasty stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
from the get-go.
if you're not in a headspace for hearing about that, don't watch Blonde, and maybe skip to the end, to the end of this episode. But
Yeah.
there's your warning. That's us going in now. Kris, what did you think of Blonde?
Well, it's really interesting that you start off talking about Blonde in a very confused way, because that's kind of how I feel coming out of this movie. There is a lot of mixed emotions, and I think because that's crammed into a nearly 3 hour runtime, which is a pretty daunting task in itself. It is a movie that I feel struggles under the weight of what it's proposing to be. I think everybody, I think ourselves included, were expecting more of a biopic sort of film from Andrew Dominik, and it ended up being something that's more rooted in fiction than fact, and it's really tainted how I feel about the movie.
Yeah, so it's worth kind of mentioning because the marketing didn't, but it's based on a novel,
Mm,
um, and that novel is a fictionalized telling of Marilyn Monroe's life. Um, and it's kind of weird that the marketing left a lot of this out because a lot of what you see on the film,
hmm.
a lot of the stuff isn't true to life.
Yeah,
I mean, a lot of it is kind of moments that have happened in Marilyn Monroe or Norma Jean's life, but a lot of it is kind of made up or emphasized for the kind of most intense form of kind of suffering possible.
mm.
Really.
And it's worth mentioning as well. I think the book was also adapted into a TV film in the early 2000s, if I'm not mistaken. But you're so right. It's deeply rooted in fiction, and it is more something that is like trying to grab the essence of who how Marilyn might have felt, as opposed to actually how she felt. It's more how we know her through media and through how she's been popularized in pop culture, and trying to look through her through that lens. And I felt that we were going to get something a little bit more in depth, and it turned out to be. I hate to tint my view on it very quickly, but I felt it was a very shallow way to look at the character, and I wasn't really expecting that. Knowing Andrew Dominik's work with him, with the Jesse James biopic and his work with Nick Cave and those documentaries, he's managed to capture very insightful things about individuals, and I was surprised that this time he didn't really manage to tap into the psyche of who Marilyn was, or the full picture of her anyway.
Yeah, I felt very much the same. I thought this is a very cold look at Marilyn Monroe and a very kind of confused and muddled kind of look at it, or a portrayal
Mm,
as well. It was just, I kind of wanted to know what the director wanted to achieve because you mentioned about this kind of, we're looking at Marilyn Monroe as an icon, but the whole film is talking about how she's always perceived as an icon, how she's
hmm.
always sexualized, how she is this thing that she isn't deep down. Yet we never see any of that. We are just continuing to kind of gaze upon her in this iconographic way,
Hmm.
where the film continues to sexualize her, and you kind of wonder if the message of what the film is going for is got lost somewhere in the making of it. I really struggled to understand where the director was going, and by the end, I assumed, okay, we're going for feelings here. We're going for like the internal feelings. What is it like inside Marilyn Monroe's head? And
Yeah.
it doesn't paint a very good picture. And obviously, her life ended through suicide. And obviously that's not a good headspace to be in. But it is interesting that it seems like none of her life at all was ever happy or fun or anything like that. And maybe that is the case, but it felt like we were just getting a kind of brief 3 hour history of Marilyn Monroe's worst emotional moments and traumas
Yeah.
that come to bear.
Yeah, it definitely was sort of one note. I wouldn't blame this necessarily on, I like to focus on talking about maybe Anna de Armas's performance, who, very capable actress, really enjoy her in whatever she's in. But I felt like she did a really good performance here. Very technically, very adept, but not necessarily her fault, but the character is written in a one-dimensional way. Very interesting to pick somebody whose second language is English, and I think she only learned it about 10 years ago as well. So it's a very, very intelligent performance, and it's a big undertaking for somebody of her background, and I'm really impressed. And for the most part, I think she really captured the essence of Marilyn. I think maybe some of the words and the inflections, she can hide the Cuban dialect
Yeah,
all the
it
time.
slipped through occasionally, but for the most part, she does like a brilliant like impression, I would say, of like the
Mhm.
Marilyn Monroe that we know. I
Yeah,
don't think we got too much of the Marilyn Monroe we didn't know, or the Norma Jean. It was still that
yeah.
very kind of breathy, characterized version that we know.
Yeah. And because the
Yeah,
character's written that way, she's written as one note in the story. So, unfortunately, it doesn't really give Darmus really much to work with. All she can really be is sad, and she's very good at the sad stuff. But, it doesn't really give us a full picture of the human being. And it ends up being like we don't really have a grasp on who she is. It feels like I'm not actually watching a fully formed real person or their thoughts. I can't tell what she's motivated by or what really matters to her because she is a vehicle for sadness,
yeah.
and it becomes almost like a parody of itself, really.
Yeah, I think and it gets really tiring by the end. I think
Oh yeah. Yeah, you can only hammer the
it's
same point so much before you need to, add something new into the frame.
it's so internal and heady and just sad. Nobody understands me. I
Oh,
am like all this trauma that's coming
mhm.
back. Um, yeah,
Which
I think Mark Commode described it as like a horror film. Am I right in thinking? I've listened to a few people
oh,
talk
interesting.
about it. I think he described it as more of a horror film than
Mhm.
like a biopic or anything like that. Um, and there's definitely
That's
a
interesting you
scene
should
near
say
the
that.
end where she's running around her house, and it's kind of got that weird camera where it almost looks like a night vision camera. Her eyes
Mhm.
look weird, and she's all veiny and horrible. That was pretty horrific.
Yeah.
That kind of was a spooky image, but yeah, I just feel like it was just all about the kind of it was about just creating an emotion, and it was very one note emotion, and it was less about definitely not story, but that's fine. I kind of saw the trailer and thought, we're recreating photographs, we're contextualizing them or recontextualizing them essentially. There's no rhyme or reason. We're just kind of like getting into the world of Marilyn Monroe, but I never felt
Mhm.
fully invested. I because of the coldness of the film, I always was a step or two back from it because I just, I couldn't emotionally get in there. It's a
100%.
hard film to watch. It's a hard film.
And it feels almost like a disservice to her as well, Marilyn,
Mm,
the person, because you and I recently, in preparation for Blonde, we watched the 7 Year Itch over the weekend.
yeah,
A movie where her charisma just pours off the screen, and movies like that, and Some Like It Hot, where I don't get the impression that this is somebody who is 100% sad all the time. You cannot conjure up such charm and enigmatic happiness on screen if you haven't at least got an ounce of that in your life. I don't like to pretend I know anything, really in depth about Marilyn, just like most of the public and our public perception of her is. But I like to believe that she was way more than this one dimensional, sad victim that we see. And everything is, grossly exaggerated. There are moments in this movie that are real, but they are really kind of oversaturated by moments that actually did not even exist. And that's kind of really confusing. That's confusing for somebody, say the average Netflix viewer. He's just going on and say, "Oh, Marilyn Monroe, I know about her. Let's watch the movie about her," and then they come out of the movie with necessarily the wrong ideas of what happened, and that can be kind of dangerous.
Yeah, I think the same because obviously we watched the seven, like you said, we watched 7 Year Itch in preparation, and I think then the only other Marilyn Monroe film I've seen is Something Like It Hot. I might
Hmm.
have seen a couple others, but I think I know a lot about Marilyn Monroe because of her kind of cultural impact.
Yes,
The Dead Star is something that we as a society have grasped onto, and
sacrificed at the altar. Yeah.
yeah, this kind of idea of a fall from grace is has kind of cemented her in this world. When you think of Marilyn Monroe, you think of an image. You don't think of a performance. I don't think.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and maybe that's what this film's getting into. Obviously, it's recreating famous images and, like I said, contextualizing them within some form of way. Um, but yeah, we've all heard bits and pieces about her story, about her life. Um, but yeah, I mean, maybe she was this sad, but I think there was some kind of misguided thoughts as to how Marilyn Monroe felt here from somebody who maybe didn't fully
Mm.
appreciate her or understand her, and is more of an outsider looking in as much as we are, rather than
Yeah.
somebody who's enveloped in that world. Like you said, Andrew
Yeah.
Dominik's a very good director, but maybe there's something here that didn't connect. I know he's done some interviews which have been quite kind of controversial, and I do find it interesting the way he talks about the film and the way he talks about Marilyn Monroe. And I think he's made a different film to what we were all expecting, and he's very aware of that. He seems to be quite confrontational with everybody he speaks to about it. Um, but yeah, I think he was trying to make something that provoked a reaction, and it has. There's no doubt. But
Yes.
I don't.
Yeah.
I finished the film yesterday, and I wasn't as angry as some people have gotten about the film. I was like, okay, it looks amazing. It's a really nice looking film, but it was cold and I didn't connect with it. I wasn't a huge fan. And then you listen to a few more things, you're like, yeah, do you know what? It doesn't work on a lot of levels, and it doesn't work as a biopic, and it doesn't work as some kind of way to internally look at Marilyn Monroe's headspace. It doesn't do anything to kind of inspect her character, or kind of break through the kind of break through the fourth wall, and turn it onto us as an audience and be like, look at you watching this film, aren't you disgusting, you're as bad as
Mm.
you're as bad as the people who were kind of using her
I
at the
think
time. It doesn't do that either, and it just
to not necessarily, you know, supporting the film. I think sometimes it uses the technique where Marilyn is looking at the screen, where she is kind of directly gazing at the audience during kind of traumatizing moments, as to say, like, you know, you guys are just spectators, and you're not helping the situation. You're just as bad as everybody else. You've done this to me. That kind of came through in some moments for me, but ultimately, I find the cinematography, even though gorgeous to look at, it was like it was like a Vogue expose, which kind of
mm,
is like a lot of the iconography that we know Marilyn for. It achieved the look that we all know, but it felt at times that it was very confusing. There was a lot of screen ratio changes and transitions from black and white to color that at first I felt like I had a grip on. I felt like, oh, right, okay, maybe the black and white moments are a bit more symbolic of the trauma induced moments, but then the trauma moments happen in color, and then we've changed from academy ratio to widescreen without any really discernible reason, uh, unless it's to promote style and just cinematographic flair. It was a bit
so
confusing to me.
so the interview I read, Andrew Dominik went into it, and there's no rhyme or reason to the uh, aspect ratio changes, color black and white. It's all to do with the
It's
fact
eight.
as what was the famous photograph that we are recreating in that scene. What ratio was that in? What color was that in? And that is exactly why
Really?
That's the only reason. Apparently, according to Andrew Dominik, though, like I said, he seems to be quite confrontational at the moment in his
I mean,
interviews.
yeah, I
Uh,
mean,
but yeah, that was his reasoning for all the different changes.
I
There's
mean, if that's so, that is for like the 1%, those people who are diehard and know, every single bit of Marilyn imagery from film and from outside, external from film. So that is really, you got to make a movie that works for everybody and conveys a message without having insider knowledge. I think that's what makes a good superhero movie. That's what makes a good film in general
yeah.
is
I mean,
that you can jump in and yeah, no, go ahead.
I would say I didn't bump into the aspect ratio thing too much. I don't mind the change in ratios of the color. It was just kind of,
Mm.
I thought it was just quite
Well, it needs to
interesting,
make
and
sense.
I don't hate the reasoning behind it. I think it's strange that
Mm.
there's not much more to it than that, but it's kind of like, okay, that's kind of cool. I don't mind that. I think for me, the biggest thing I hit it up against was just the coldness and then the confusing message.
Mm.
And I think that was like the bit where it really was kind of, I was like, yeah, something doesn't click here. Was a scene. I think Marilyn Monroe leaves an audition. There's a guy by
Yeah.
the door, and he's like, "Look at the ass on her,"
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then you're like, "Oh, okay." You know, everybody sexualizes Marilyn Monroe, but then it cuts to a shot of her walking away, so you get to see her bum. And it's kind of
Mm.
like, oh, so we're also gazing now. Like we're also part of the problem. Like isn't the film supposed to be fighting against this idea, but yet we're still doing this, and the film does that a lot. It does a lot more graphically than just showing her walking away.
Yeah. Well, going back to my point earlier on, I do think the whole purpose of this movie, apart from shouldn't we feel sad for this person, is Andrew Dominik just really holding a mirror to us and saying, "Hey, it's all our fault," and I think it's all just like a really big, it's a big circle of hate going on here in this movie. I mean, from the very first scene, it is like I wasn't really prepared for the we get introduced to Norma as a child and her troubled relationship with her mother. What that is seated in fact it is well documented that her father was absent during her whole life, and her mother was a raging sort of depressive mental health victim, and really kind of projected that onto her daughter, and her daughter spent years going to different orphanages and everything. But it's very confusing from the beginning because remember it's a big fire going on in LA, and I don't know if that's based on a real fire that happened or anything. But that scene, that event where she takes her daughter up into the hills of Hollywood Hills while they're on fire, and it's a really irresponsible thing that she's doing in that moment, and it's horrific to watch, and it's abuse. She's hitting Norma Jean, and that stuff never actually happened, and it puts you off kilter from the very beginning. We don't get the movie that we kind of wanted. We don't see the full person. We don't get the movie that we feel like Marilyn deserved because she's just been a victim of this sort of material her whole life.
Yeah.
And and I feel that's a disservice to what Andrew was trying to achieve, because I feel like he does love Marilyn Monroe and appreciates her work, but I feel like it just came off the wrong way.
I think as well, it's a shame that the most deplorable, traumatic, horrible things in here are the things that aren't true. And I think that's where,
Mm,
when you
yeah.
find that out, that's where you kind of hit a bit of a wall, because you're just like, you're trying to show me that this woman had so much going on, yet the things that you are uh, you know putting the most emphasis on, and most trauma
Hmm.
and most disgusting, graphic, horrible imagery, are the things that don't have much factual, don't have the sources to back them up, kind of thing.
Mm. The
Um,
love triangle is a disgusting plot line that is really, it's a series of you know um, blackmailing and manipulation going on there, and then you look it up and you're like, she technically was friends with them in real life and was lovers with one of them for a brief while, and then that's all you can read up about the whole thing, and
yeah,
that's the only fact that's there, and it's like that was a horrible thing that you depicted on screen, really like traumatic even to watch. It was pretty awkward, and
which
yet
one is this?
there's
Is
no
this
factual
is
foundation
this
there.
the thruple that they're
Yes, the
in?
the Gemini, the
Yeah,
Gemini,
okay,
yes.
gotcha. I wasn't sure, because also there's the JFK rape scene,
Oh, I
which
forgot about
is
that. How could I forget about that scene? That
which
was
is
like,
the most difficult one, I'd say. There's an
yeah,
abortion scene, which, as far as we're aware, Marilyn Monroe didn't have any abortions. Famously miscarried, I believe, and
yeah.
very much wanted kids. But there's a pretty difficult abortion scene, and a scene later in the film where her fetus is talking to her, like another child
We
that
get
she
multiple scenes where we see the fetus growing and breathing inside of
and
her belly.
I know a lot of people have been quite upset by that and believe that it's Andrew Dominik's life, pro life politics going onto the film. I don't necessarily agree with that too much. I think he's trying to internalize what Marilyn Monroe was headspace was at, but again, it's
Mm,
within the context of a fictional thing that's happened. So it's like
yeah, you can read it both ways.
you can't really
Yeah.
put too much emphasis on either of it. It's strange. I don't know whether they needed the book to be able to even make the film. Like how much, what kind of rights do you need to make a film about Marilyn Monroe? But it's kind of like,
Mm. Interesting. I
could we
haven't
have
looked that
done
up really.
could we have done this without the horrible elements which aren't
Mm.
real? Like
Yeah,
there's an interesting film somewhere in here with a brilliant performance from Anna de Armas. Um, but it's just kind of
and
muddled
it's
down in
90 minutes long as
this
well.
yeah, it's just kind of muddled in this fictitious, traumatic, abusive sphere of, well,
Hmm.
what am I supposed to feel?
Yeah, and perhaps it would have worked on me a lot better if I had seen it in the headspace of, going to and like watching, sitting down and watching on a big screen. I might have been a bit more in the trance that the movie was trying to kind of put us in under a spell. But when you're watching it on Netflix, I'm thinking there's going to be so many people who are not into this sort of movie that are going to be exposed to this on Netflix. See that it's in the top 10 Netflix movies, put it on, and I would be surprised. I would be surprised if 90, oh, well, if 5% of Netflix's viewership get through the whole movie. I can't see it.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. It's a difficult one to home sit as well. Like even my mind was kind of going elsewhere near the end. I think
Oh
the
yeah,
end really
I had to
kind
put the
of
phone on the other side of the room.
yeah. The end really does kind of repeat the same points over and over again
Mhm.
until her tragic death. Um,
Can
yeah,
I say one good
it's
point about the movie?
oh yeah. We should talk about what we like. We
Yeah.
should.
Well, I'd like to say, I was a really big fan of how they showcased Marilyn's relationship with Arthur Miller. I thought that was really well, I gave Marilyn a little bit of character in a way. And I think Adrian Brody plays that performance so delicately. He's really just seeing him mature, even as an actor, even more is, he's always been great, but he's really good in this role. And him and Marilyn, as opposed to her other former lovers in the past, like Joe DiMaggio and the Gemini, I feel that they were a bit more symbiotic and they kind of more relied on each other intellectually, because it's fair to say that Marilyn Monroe, Norma Jean, she was notoriously a very well read woman. Even though she played this dumb blonde on screen, she was. That's why everybody's so fascinated with her, because she did live a double life, from what we know about her.
Yeah,
And she was really well self-educated and was very soulful, always liked to know about the world. And yeah, and Arthur Miller is quite an interesting sort of caveat to that, because they kind of work well with each other, and he's emotionally delicate and she lifts him up, and he can see through the public gaze, and it's really, it gives her a little bit of a bit more free dimension too. So I think more of that in the movie would have been a bit more interesting than her being a victim of her previous relationships.
yeah, and those scenes in particular, the way they're shot, the colors are beautiful. Like the whole film, you can't
Oh yeah.
fault the cinematography. It looks stunning.
Hmm.
The attention to detail on the costuming and the hair, everything looks incredible. And I don't think anybody puts in a bad performance. It's just the piece as a whole,
Yeah.
I think, doesn't click. But all the elements are there for a really good film. And yeah, I mean, you can't fault the way it looks. It's an incredible looking film.
Well, how did you feel about the NC-17 rating for this movie at the end? Do you feel like it really was all just blowing smoke, or do you think that that really was a justified rating that we rarely see in films these days.
Yeah, do you know what? All right, so obviously there's some really kind of difficult to watch stuff. You know, it does warrant the rating, but it's
Mm,
not nearly as I think the kind of the build up to, you know, this idea, the rumor mill going mad that maybe Netflix weren't happy with the rating, that it
mm,
was so extreme, so crazy, all this kind of stuff, maybe led to the, you know, the realization that it wasn't. It is extreme in places, but it didn't warrant the
yeah,
kind of noise
perhaps.
surrounding it. Did you feel the same?
I felt, I felt like, maybe 18 at a push up until the JFK scene. And I can understand probably why that probably tipped it over the edge because, especially the I won't go into details about the camera angle that we get in that scene, but it is something that we don't usually get in Hollywood movies. I think is a fair thing to say, and it is so prolonged and is so shocking, and especially when it's centered around a historical figure like JFK, and we haven't really seen him in this light before. Everything towards JFK and media, and if it's Forrest Gump or if it's Jackie, has generally been sympathetic and heartwarming towards him. And yeah, I wonder what the Kennedy family thought about that scene, or how much that is rooted in truth too, because it kind of almost centered on libel a little bit, didn't it?
100%, 100%, because it's all conspiracy and rumor really about a relationship between JFK and Marilyn Monroe. I don't
Hmm.
think there's no solid proof, is there? It's just kind of, as far as I'm aware. Um, so
Yeah,
then
yeah,
to
these things, yeah.
so then to add a a rape scene on top of that is kind of weird.
While
So
he's on the phone.
yeah, it's weird. And then yeah, shot in a way where if you were like a centimeter, if you push the camera a centimeter down, you're borderline pornographic. It's
Hmm.
yeah, I can't imagine the Kennedy family are happy at all about that. But who knows? Well,
I don't know how they got away with it. Actually, it was not what I was expecting in this movie.
no, no, it does go quite far. There's no doubt about it. But that does remind me. You mentioned Jackie Kennedy, and when you were talking then of our messages whilst I was watching the film, and you said, I believe you said something along the
Hmm.
lines of like, it's not as well structured or kind of shot or kind of well done
Yeah.
as a Pablo Larraín film, who has obviously been
Yes.
taking some very kind of uh, big figures, your Princess Dianas and your Jackie Kennedys, and making films around them in a similar fashion. You almost feel like he probably could have directed this film, but I think we would have maybe had a more positive result at the end
Hmm.
of it.
See, the difference is, and that's really the most interesting comparison, is because Lorraine has been able to make these very kind of from the outset controversial films very they work because from the outset, as soon as you walk into the movie declares itself as a fantasy and it lives in that fantasy space. So you can buy it for that, and it's a a borderline horror movie or a thriller about the headspace of a character, and it's dreamlike in the way it's presented. And
Yeah,
Marilyn, unfortunately blonde, starts in the way that follows the trappings of a biopic, where we're seeing there's elements of nightmarishness and dreamlike qualities peppered throughout the whole movie, 100%. It's 50% of its DNA, but it also has the DNA of a traditional biopic. And
yeah,
from the start, you're following the
from birth
pathway
to
of
death.
yeah, life to death, and it's that Johnny Cash thing, the Dewey Cox thing. It follows the pathway, but you know it's so blurred between the lines of fiction and reality that you just don't know where you're standing anymore. You become emotionally numb, like the people around Marilyn. You're not into her plight because I'm watching a cartoon character. I'm not watching a real person.
Yeah. I absolutely agree, and I think that the best thing Pablo Larraín does with his films as well is he sets them in a short period of time, a short
Yes,
but
they get in and
very,
out.
he makes that time period feel like it's like an
Mhm.
influential period of time on that person's
Yeah.
life, and this is why they might be like this, is because these 3 days, this retreat, all that kind of stuff. Watching your husband get shot in front of you, and the fallout from that is probably the best way. It makes you wonder, like, which part of this film would you have stretched into the Pablo Larraín film. I probably would have done the Some Like It Hot, Billy Wilder, the kind of tensions on set there. Maybe focus it around that space would have been maybe more interesting. You probably could have got into all the same stuff, maybe. Um, the kind of, why is Marilyn Monroe breaking down at this moment? Is it because of the miscarriage? Is it because of, fame's had its hold on her for too long? All this kind of stuff. She feels like she's, she is quite. You can tell in her performances she is quite witty and in on the joke, but in the film it portrays her on the Some Like a Hot set as feeling like she's she is the joke, and she's starting to feel like maybe people are laughing at her and stuff like that.
It's so funny. Imagine I can't imagine what it was like watching her on screen, in the 50s whenever she really blew up as a big Hollywood icon. But we watch her now through a lens of we understand that she actually was very talented and put a lot of thought into her performances, and we can enjoy them on the level that she isn't the dumb blonde, she's playing the dumb blonde, and she does it really, really well. And her comic timing is amazing. She usually, you know, outshines anybody else she's sharing a scene with. Definitely prevalent in the 7 Year Itch. She definitely, outweighs her co-star in the short amount of time that she's on screen. But it's interesting. I wonder how people felt back in those days. Because now we can really see who she was as a performer, and we didn't get enough of her. She really was a talented person, and that's what I can take away. I just can't. I don't feel like I come out of Blonde feeling like I know anything more about her that's true.
No.
Because I am interested in her. And by the end of the 2.5, 2 and 3/4 hours of Blonde, I was disinterested. And that's the opposite I want to feel from a Marilyn Monroe movie. I want to keep delving down the rabbit hole, and the rabbit hole wasn't there to delve down. It was just a series of deplorable events. And yeah, that's how I felt about Blonde.
Yeah, I feel the exact same way. I wanted to get into that headspace more, but I couldn't. And yeah, I didn't learn anything new about Marilyn Monroe. I think I learned more about her from the 7 Year Itch, watching that in
Mm,
preparation for this film, and being like, wow, she is a
that's so
star.
funny.
Would she be as big an icon had she not died at such a young age? Probably not, but she still would have been one of the great movie stars. There's no doubt about it, because her presence on screen was kind of fascinating, and watching that for the first time, and I didn't love the 7 Year Itch. I thought it was fine, but like the way
Hmm.
she
Yeah,
she
same.
builds her own kind of persona and character in that way, and completely owns it,
Yeah.
is full of charisma, is kind of like really wonderful to watch.
You make such a good point. You get more character and layers to Marilyn Monroe in a movie that came out nearly 70 years ago, where she plays a part, where she plays a role. You get more free dimension and more insight into who she is as a person than you do out of this nearly 3 hour movie about her. And I think
Yeah,
that's the main come away from this.
definitely, definitely. Yeah, I've only just realized, but yeah, I learned more about Marilyn Monroe then.
Well, that's our views on Blonde. You can currently stream that on Netflix, and let us know if you agree or disagree with our opinions. But we're gonna kind of segue into a different segment of the show that I've, reportedly a few people have told us that they've really enjoyed. So we're making a return, and we are teasing the upcoming special for the movies that streaming forgot, and this is a Halloween special.
Yeah, we got some spooky stuff planned for you over the next couple of weeks, guys, as we're getting deeper into Halloween times.
Mhm.
Yeah, so we are going to be doing next week another films that streaming forgot, and it's going to be a Halloween
Mhm.
special. So, Chris, you and I have been scouring the streaming sites once more to find a horror film. However, in our messages to each other over the past few days as we've been looking for them. We're going to be a bit kinder to each other this time, I think, is the
Yeah.
idea. We're not actively trying to find a bad film like maybe we have done in the past. More Chris than me.
Oh,
But
come on.
we are trying to find a horror or Halloween, kind of type film
Hmm.
that maybe has kind of gone below the radar. Not many people have heard of, but who knows? Could be a good time from premise, ratings, whatever alone.
Yeah, because I don't know about you, Alex. Every year I get sick of watching the same. Even though they're great horror movies, I get sick of watching the same ones over and over again. You got your John Carpenters, you got The Thing, you got Alien, you got your Nightmare on Elm Streets, you got all those. But we wanted to mix it up and cover a blind spot that we probably would never unless we forced each other to watch these movies. Um, well, and I think I picked kindly for you this time. It's not Atlantis Untold, the movie that infamously broke Alex last time we did this segment of the show.
Yeah, no, I'm glad. I was like, please be kind to me.
Yeah. And
let's. There's so many horror's like a weird genre for me because I grew up not
mhm,
really liking it, but I think that's because I didn't always fully understand the fascination with wanting to be scared. Um,
mhm.
but it's really kind of grown on me recently, and I think there's been some incredible horror films. And I also, me and my partner, we love going like we watch a lot of horror films together anyway. But in October, we go to town on the horror films. We call it Horror
Yeah.
October, and we watch as many kind of uh, different horror films as we can. So this is just kind of another one that we'll be watching together. I hope.
So, Alex, the movie I have picked for you to watch on this Halloween special is a pretty well regarded movie, actually. Even though
Okay.
probably not a lot of our listeners would have heard of it before, it is really well regarded in the indie scene, and it is a movie that's currently streaming on Amazon Prime. So fits the parameters of our rules of the show that we've underlined at the beginning. It is a movie called Images from 1972. It's a British psychological horror film written and directed by Robert Altman. The picture follows an unstable children's author who finds herself engulfed in apparitions and hallucinations while staying at her remote vacation home. So, yes, this is a bit of a trippy British horror movie from back in the day. That is, I've heard good things about it.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to that. Robert Altman is the director, so The Long Goodbye. He was in Oh no, he was an actor in The Long Goodbye. Sorry, I'm looking up all the things now to have a
Yeah, yeah.
see what I'm
Having
getting
a look at
into.
his
But yeah,
filmography
that
there.
sounds really interesting, Chris. I'm very excited
I mean,
to
unfortunately,
see
he did
that.
direct Popeye in 1980, which is not a good movie.
Very intrigued. Shall I tell you about
Did I do better
mine
though
or
this time?
yeah, it definitely seems that way. All right, so Chris, the film I have chosen for you is also an Amazon Prime film, uh, so you'll be
Oh,
happy to know. So this is very interesting because it's a British film as well. I believe it's set in Northern Ireland, so there you go.
what?
Yeah. It's a
Isn't
supernatural.
isn't every movie set in Northern Ireland a horror movie?
No comment. No comment. It's called Wake Wood, and it's a supernatural horror film from 2009, and it actually stars Timothy Spall and Aidan Gillen.
No, these are yeah, notoriously great British theater actor is fantastic. Yeah, we've got Littlefinger from Game of Thrones, and we've got the great Tim Spall. No, I'm looking forward to that.
Exactly, and
What
it
is it about?
says the parents of a girl who was killed by a savage dog are granted the opportunity to spend 3 days with their deceased daughter. It's a nice
It's like
lean
the
90
Simpsons thing of
minutes.
digging up the grave. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm intrigued by the premise alone. It actually has an 80% Rotten Tomatoes score, though that does seem to be very heavily weighted on the critics side. But yeah, I found a review from the Guardian that gave it 4 out of 5 stars. So I thought I've not heard of this, but potentially it could be an interesting one for you to watch. So I hope I also have been kind to you this time round, Chris.
Yeah, no, definitely something me and Lauren are going to catch up on, courtesy of Alex.
Nice. Yeah. It was just one of those things as well. It's kind of like, those actors they they wouldn't
Done classically, yeah.
they wouldn't go for something that had nothing that intrigued them, surely. Unless this
We'd
really
like
is
to think so.
the one for them.
I can't, yeah, because I can't imagine they would have got a lot of money from this. So it would have been
Maybe
a
again.
relatively small budget, and unless they're just doing it as a part of a promote Ireland tour or something. But no, look, very much looking forward to this, Alex. So
Nice.
yeah, and I think coming up for the rest of this month, I think we're probably looking to, in future episodes, do a top sort of 5 list for best Halloween themed movies, or favorites. So we haven't done a
Hmm.
top 5 list for a while, and it's really good, you know, the let the listeners kind of know a little bit more about us as well, and what makes us tick. And I think the last time our top 5 comfort films definitely showcased our mindset a little bit.
Yes, yeah. Yours for the better and mine probably for the worse.
Well, I don't know. I did admit that one of my favorite movies is The Parent Trap, so I don't know about
Oh yeah, yeah. But apparently, I go to sleep at night watching Portrait of a Lady on Fire, and then I think everybody
Oh,
everybody called me
hot.
after that episode to find out if I was okay.
If your hot water bottle.
Yeah. I just like to cry myself to sleep.
With a French subtitled movie about forbidden love.
There's nothing better, Chris. There's nothing
Nothing better.
better. Wicked. So yeah, tune in next week, guys, to find out what we think about those films. That is Wake Wood for Chris,
Hmm.
and what's mine called again?
Images for
Images.
Alex.
Images for myself. So yeah, very excited for that, and a little bit of British cinema for us both there. Um, so yeah, films that stream and forgot. Halloween special next week, baby. Enjoy. But for
Looking
now,
forward to it.
this episode we reviewed Blonde. We both weren't big fans, but it's one of those films you should maybe check out just to see what all the fuss is
Mm.
about.
Yeah, I'm really
But yeah,
interested to hear what other people think about the movie too, because it's really seemed to divided everybody. Some people are like 5 stars, some people are 1. So, tell us what side of the fence you sit on.
yeah. I mean, some of the best films are like that. It doesn't seem to be a lot of middle ground reviews. It's a visceral reaction one way or the other. I
Hmm.
think seems to be coming from Blonde. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm really excited to see what other people have to say about that as well. So, guys, subscribe to us where you can. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, as you are probably aware if you're listening already. Like us on Instagram at The Film Angle, and tell your friends, tell your family, and enjoy. I'm Alex,
And I'm Chris.
and this has been The Film Angle.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.